Do you remember how long summer used to feel? As a child, 3 months felt like an entire lifetime. Long enough to forget what school was like. Long enough to become a slightly different person by the time September arrived. Now think about the last summer you experienced as an adult. It was gone before you finished planning what to do with it. Nothing changed about the calendar. Summer is still the same number of days it always was. But something changed about the way you move through it. And here is what makes this genuinely unsettling. It isn't slowing down. Every year, without exception, the years feel shorter than the one before. The weeks blur. The months collapse into each other. And then suddenly it's December again, and you're not entirely sure where the year went. This isn't nostalgia. It isn't distraction. It isn't a symptom of a busy life. It is something your brain is doing, deliberately, by design. And once you understand what that is, you will never experience a passing year the same way again. But before we get to the answer, we need to understand something about memory that most people get completely wrong. You don't experience time directly. Nobody does. There is no clock inside your brain ticking off seconds in real time, no internal metronome keeping perfect pace with the world outside. What you experience instead is something far stranger. You experience a reconstruction. Your brain takes fragments of experience, moments that stood out, things that felt new or significant or emotionally charged, and it stitches them together into something that feels like a continuous flow of time. But it isn't continuous. It is edited, and your brain decides what makes the cut. Here is the principle that governs that editing. Your brain pays attention to what is new. When something is unfamiliar, when your brain has never encountered it before, it requires real processing power to understand it. It has to build new mental frameworks, compare it to existing knowledge, decide how to categorize it, figure out what it means. And that effort, that active work of processing the unfamiliar, is what makes time feel substantial. It is what makes a single afternoon in a place you've never been feel richer and longer than an entire week of ordinary routine. Now hold that thought, because this is where the answer begins to take shape. When you were a child, almost everything was new. Your first time in a car, your first time at a school, your first time understanding that other people had entirely separate inner lives from your own. Every day contained experiences your brain had never processed before, and so every day required real attention, real effort, real encoding. Time felt long because your brain was working hard to absorb a world it was encountering for the first time. Now think about a typical Tuesday in your adult life. You wake up in the home you know completely. You follow a morning routine your body could perform unconscious. You drive a route your brain stopped actively processing months ago. You sit in a workspace that holds no surprises. You have conversations that follow familiar patterns. You eat food you've eaten hundreds of times before. At no point does your brain need to work hard to understand what's happening. It already knows, and so it does something efficient and completely automatic. It skips, not consciously, not intentionally. But when there is nothing new to encode, the brain doesn't generate much memory of the experience at all. And when you look back at that Tuesday, or that week, or that month, there is almost nothing there. No markers, no milestones, no moments that required enough attention to leave a trace. And a period of time, with almost nothing encoded into memory, feels, in retrospect, like it barely happened. This is why time accelerates as you age. Not because the days are shorter, but because fewer of them are leaving marks. Now here is the layer that I find genuinely difficult to sit with, because it raises a question most people spend their entire lives never asking. If your brain skips over the familiar, and the familiar grows larger with every passing year, what percentage of your life is your brain actually recording? The honest answer is less than you think, much less. Neuroscientists estimate that the vast majority of daily experience never gets encoded into long-term memory at all. It passes through you. It shapes you in ways you can't access consciously, and then it's gone. Which means that most of life, for most people, is not being lived in the sense we usually mean. It is being processed automatically, efficiently, without attention. And efficiency, it turns out, is the enemy of felt time. But here is where something shifts. Because if the speed of time is tied to how much new experience the brain is processing, then it follows that time can be slowed, not literally, but in the way that actually matters, in the way you experience it. Think about the last time you did something for the first time. A new city, a new skill, a conversation that went somewhere you didn't expect, a moment that asked your brain to actually pay attention because it didn't already know what was happening. Remember how that felt? Not just during the experience, but afterward. How much of it you could recall, how substantial that period of time felt when you looked back at it. That density of memory is not accidental. It is what a brain in active engagement produces, and it is available to you at any age. The research on this is quietly remarkable. Studies on autobiographical memory consistently show that periods of life filled with novel experience, travel, new relationships, new challenges, new environments feel longer and richer in retrospect than equivalent periods of comfortable routine. Not because of the pleasure involved, not because of the significance of what happened, but because of the sheer amount of new information the brain was asked to process. Novelty is the currency of felt time, and most adults have stopped spending it. Now, there is one more layer to this, and this one reframes the whole conversation in a way that I think matters. There is a theory called the proportional theory of time perception. The idea is simple. When you are 5 years old, 1 year represents 20% of your entire life. It is a genuinely enormous proportion of everything you have ever experienced. When you are 40, 1 year represents 2.5%. The same year, the same 365 days, but measured against the vast accumulated weight of everything that came before it. It feels like a much smaller fraction of something much larger. This is why your childhood summers felt endless. Not just because they were full of new experiences, but because they were a significant portion of everything you had ever known, and why each passing year feels faster. Because each one represents a smaller and smaller slice of a life that keeps getting longer. You are not losing time, you are simply accumulating more of it. And each new year, measured against all the years before it, is proportionally smaller than the last. Now here is where both theories, the novelty theory and the proportional theory, point to the same conclusion. And it is not a comfortable one. The feeling that time is speeding up is not an illusion your brain produces by accident. It is an accurate reflection of how you are living. A life of familiar routines, comfortable patterns, and carefully avoided uncertainty will feel, in memory, like it passed in a moment. Not because it wasn't pleasant, not because nothing happened, but because the brain had nothing new to record, and a life measured in accumulated novel experiences. In moments that demanded real attention, in periods that forced the brain to actually work, will feel, in memory, like it contained far more time than it actually did. The same number of years, a completely different experience of having lived them. So here is the question I want to leave sitting with you, not rhetorically, as a genuine question worth returning to. When you look back at this year from the other side of it, will there be anything there? Will there be markers? Moments that required your full attention? Experiences that were genuinely new? Or will it look, in memory, the way so many years begin to look, like it was somehow already over before you noticed it had begun? Time is not speeding up, your brain is simply recording less of it, and the distance between those two things is entirely up to you.